The galaxy had always been at peace. For centuries, all the races of the stars had learned to live side by side, trading goods, knowledge, and technology. Each species had its place, and no one dared to break the rules that had kept the universe in balance. But everything changed on that one fateful day. On a large station, floating in the empty space between two massive star systems, the High Council of the Galaxy was meeting. Representatives from dozens of powerful species filled the grand chamber. Their voices echoed in the hall as they discussed matters of trade and diplomacy. The room was large, filled with holographic screens, and the smell of strange alien food filled the air. All races, from the peaceful Virians to the fierce Centauri, gathered in silence, waiting for the next speaker. Among them stood a human diplomat named Marcus Ford. He had been chosen to represent Earth at this council. He was young, but his sharp mind and natural charisma had earned him respect. He stood confidently, his posture perfect, listening as a Centauri ambassador spoke about the new regulations on trade routes. His dark brown eyes watched carefully, knowing the importance of every word. The Centauri ambassador, a tall alien with blue scales and a sharp, pointed face, finished his speech. The entire room went silent. For a moment, everyone just stared at Marcus, waiting for his response. Marcus stood up, clearing his throat. The crowd was expecting a calm, diplomatic response, as it was always the human's way to use words instead of force. He had learned the art of diplomacy well. But as he began to speak, something strange happened. A sharp voice cut through the room. "You humans always think you can take whatever you want, don't you?" said a voice from across the room. It was the Nullarian representative. He was a short, round alien with small, beady eyes and a thick, greenish skin. His species had always been known for their sharp tongues, but never before had any of them spoken so openly to a human. Marcus felt a rush of heat in his chest. He had heard insults before, but this time it felt different. This time, something inside him snapped. The words that came next were not diplomatic. They were not calm. "We don't take anything that isn't offered to us," Marcus said, his voice colder than he intended. "But when people like you insult us in front of others, that's when we take action." The room went completely still. No one had expected this response. The other delegates looked at each other, unsure of how to react. Marcus's words seemed to hang in the air like a storm cloud. He knew he had just crossed a line, but the anger inside him was too strong to hold back. The Nullarian's eyes narrowed, and he stood up. "You dare to speak like that in my presence? You should know your place, human. You are nothing but a small, fragile species that barely deserves to be here." The words hit Marcus like a slap to the face. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as he stood there, facing the Nullarian ambassador. Everyone knew that insults were a common part of the council's debates, but there was something different about this one. It was personal. It was meant to humiliate. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his anger pressing down on him. He had learned to keep his cool, to stay composed, but something in him had changed. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightened. The atmosphere in the room shifted, and it was as if the whole galaxy was watching. The Virian ambassador, a tall creature with silver skin and large, wise eyes, stepped forward. "This is not the way of peace," he said, his voice calm and steady. "We should resolve our differences with words, not threats." But Marcus was no longer interested in talking. In the blink of an eye, Marcus slammed his fist onto the table in front of him. The sound was deafening. The entire room jumped at the sudden noise. The holographic screens flickered, and some delegates took a step back in fear. Even the Virian ambassador seemed to hesitate for a moment. Marcus looked around the room, his eyes blazing. "You want to see what happens when humans get angry," he said, his voice low and filled with power. "You'll regret it." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The Nullarian's face turned a deep shade of green, but he didn't back down. Instead, he sneered. "You think you scare me, human?" The Nullarian hissed. "You and your kind are nothing compared to the power of the galaxy. Marcus took a deep breath, his anger reaching its peak. He could feel the blood rushing through his veins, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time, he realized something about his own species. Humans had always been small and weak, compared to the giant, powerful races of the galaxy. But they had something no one else had: anger. And when humans got angry, they didn't back down. They didn't run. They fought. The room was silent again, but this time, the silence was heavy. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber flickered. The giant holographic screens around them went black. A low hum echoed in the distance, as if something was charging up. The air itself seemed to grow thick, like a storm was brewing. The human delegates exchanged worried glances. What was happening? Was this some kind of warning? Marcus could feel the energy in the room shift. This wasn't just about words anymore. This was about something far greater. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. And as the hum grew louder, Marcus realized that what had started as a simple insult had turned into something much more dangerous. He had no idea what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure: the humans were no longer going to sit back and let the galaxy control them. He turned to face the Nolarian. His anger was not just a spark anymore, it was a raging fire. The universe had no idea what it was about to face. "You've made a mistake," Marcus said, his voice cold, his eyes burning with fury. "And now you'll see what happens when humans get angry." The tension in the room was suffocating. As Marcus stood there, his fists clenched and his body trembling with raw emotion, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The Nolarian ambassador, still standing, glared at him with unblinking eyes, daring him to make the first move. The Virian representative, who had once spoken with calm wisdom, now seemed unsure, stepping back slightly. The others, Xantari, Vorkians, and more, watched in stunned silence, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. Marcus's anger was like nothing he had ever felt before. The insult, the arrogance, and the years of being looked down upon, all of it came crashing down on him. He had spent his life being told that humanity was weak, that they were just a small, fragile race among giants. But no more. Something inside him snapped, and he knew, deep in his bones, that it was time to show the galaxy what humans were truly capable of. The council chamber felt smaller now, as though the walls themselves were closing in. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. The hum that had filled the room continued to grow, vibrating in the very air, and suddenly, there was a flash of light. Without warning, the entire chamber was plunged into darkness. The sudden change startled everyone. For a moment, there was only the sound of shifting movements, the shuffle of feet, and muffled voices. Then the lights flickered back on, but this time, the atmosphere had changed. The air felt charged with energy, and there was a sense of unease that settled over everyone. It was as though the very room itself was reacting to the anger that had been unleashed. Marcus knew this wasn't just a simple diplomatic breakdown anymore. This was a message. The hum, the flickering lights, the sudden tension in the air, they weren't caused by a technical malfunction. It was something more. Something powerful was beginning to stir, and it all started with his words. He felt a strange energy rising within him, a power that had been dormant in humanity for so long. He was no longer just a diplomat representing Earth. He was part of something bigger, something that could no longer be ignored. The Nolarian ambassador's voice cut through the uneasy silence, dripping with contempt. "You think you've won, human. This is nothing. We will crush you just as easily as we have crushed so many others before." Marcus didn't flinch. He met the Nolarian's gaze head-on, his eyes burning with the fire of his fury. The words that followed were simple, but heavy with meaning. "You have no idea what you're up against." The room seemed to pause, as if every being present understood that something had shifted. The Nalarian's face twisted with a mix of fury and disbelief. He had never expected such defiance from the human race. He had always seen them as nothing more than ants, scurrying around in the shadows of the galaxy's great empires. But now, for the first time, he was starting to see them as a threat. Marcus's words were only the beginning. Outside the council chamber, on the human ships that had been stationed in orbit, the feeling of anger was spreading. A ripple of energy flowed through the ranks of the fleet, reaching every human soldier, every officer, every crew member. The feeling was hard to describe. Raw, primal, and unstoppable. It was like the entire human race had been awakened from a long sleep, and now they were ready to prove themselves. On Earth, the leaders and generals who had been monitoring the situation from the safety of their command centers could sense the change. The data streams from the council room painted a picture of growing tension, of a moment on the verge of exploding. They knew what had happened. The humans had finally reached their breaking point, but no one could have predicted what would happen next. Back in the chamber, the silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. The other delegates, once so sure of their superiority, now seemed uneasy. They could feel it too. The weight of humanity's anger was pressing down on them, like a storm cloud that had gathered in the distance, ready to strike. The Varian ambassador cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly. We must not let this escalate. Peace was always the goal here. There is no need for violence. Marcus looked at him, his gaze unwavering. Violence? No, but standing by and letting ourselves be humiliated. That ends now. And with those words, something changed in the room. The Nalarian sneered and turned his back on Marcus, but the damage had been done. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of what was coming. No one would be able to go back to the way things were. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted in an instant. As Marcus slowly turned to leave the chamber, the hum in the air reached its peak, vibrating through the walls and floors. It was a signal, a sign that humanity was no longer going to be passive. They had been pushed to the edge, and now the galaxy would feel their wrath. The old rules were gone, and the humans would no longer beg for peace. They would take it. The ripple of change had only just begun, but already the galaxy trembled. Word spread quickly, faster than any one species could have anticipated. Humans, the so-called weaklings of the galaxy, had shown a side of themselves that no one thought possible. The once dismissed species was no longer willing to take a backseat to the empires that had ruled the stars for centuries. Across the galaxy, the most powerful beings began to notice the subtle shifts in the cosmic balance. Humanity's anger had sparked something more than just a heated argument in a council chamber. It had awakened a force that would change everything. The first to react were the leaders of the great empires. Their diplomats and spies had already reported on the events in the council room, and now they were scrambling to understand what had happened. No one could deny the shift. The hum that had filled the air during Marcus's outburst had been a warning. It wasn't just an outburst, it was a signal that humanity was no longer going to be intimidated or bullied into submission. On the planet of Vorkar, the Vorkian High Command convened in their grand war room. Their massive serpentine bodies coiled on metallic thrones as they discussed the implications of what had transpired. The humans have done something, General Trekar hissed, his voice sharp like a whip. They've awakened something deep within themselves. This is dangerous. His fellow officers, towering figures with shimmering scales, nodded grimly. Vorkians, like many of the galaxy's empires, had always thought of humans as little more than an annoyance, a species to be dismissed. They were small, fragile creatures, easily controlled by the more powerful races. But now, something was different. The humans weren't afraid anymore. They weren't begging for peace or permission. They were demanding respect. At the same time, far across the stars, the Xantari, a race of immense telepaths, felt the disturbance ripple through their collective consciousness. We've made a grave mistake, Zanine, one of their leading telepaths, muttered under her breath. The Xantari, known for their wisdom and foresight, had never underestimated the power of anger. But even they were caught off guard by the ferocity of humanity's response. They had thought the humans weak, a race that could be manipulated. Now, it seemed like humanity had discovered a strength no one could have predicted. But the most alarming reaction came from the Nularian Empire, the species that had looked down on humans for centuries. Their once proud ambassador, who had mocked Marcus in the council chamber, was now pacing nervously in his private chambers. He could feel it, the power, the undeniable strength radiating from the humans. "What have we done?" he muttered to himself. This is not just a war of words. He knew it. Deep down, he could sense that humanity had just entered the arena in a way that no one had seen coming. The galaxy had believed that the Nularian Empire was invincible, but even they were starting to realize that their reign might soon be challenged by the very species they had thought insignificant. The Nularian had made a mistake, a costly one, and now it was only a matter of time before the consequences would unfold. Back on Earth, the political leaders and military commanders were already preparing for the storm that was coming. A special council had been established, with the best minds of humanity coming together to devise a plan. The human fleet, which had once been a small force in the shadow of the galactic giants, now stood at the ready. The generals were aware of the growing tension, and each one knew that the moment was fast approaching. As the Earth's leaders gathered in their underground command center, Marcus, the human diplomat who had sparked the change, stood by a large map, watching as data flowed in. The planets of the galaxy that had once seemed so distant, so untouchable, now felt within reach. "We've waited long enough," he said, his voice steady, even though a storm of emotion swirled inside him. "We've been patient, but no more. It's time for us to make our move." His words sent a chill down the spines of those around him. They all knew what it meant. Humanity was no longer just defending itself. It was preparing to take control. The galaxy, once ruled by fear and power, was about to feel the wrath of a species that had been pushed to its limits. The world had changed in an instant, and the consequences would be far-reaching. The Nularian Empire, the Virian Collective, and all the other mighty empires that had once considered themselves untouchable were about to find out what it meant to anger humanity. The galaxy had been warned, but the true test was yet to come. Marcus knew that the next steps would determine whether humanity would rise or fall, but deep inside, he could feel it. They weren't going to fall. Not this time. The storm was coming. It was a storm unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, and no one was prepared for what was about to hit them. The ripple of humanity's anger continued to grow, and soon, the galaxy could no longer ignore the storm that was brewing. What had begun as a single outburst in a council chamber had now become a full-fledged movement, one that spread like wildfire. Humanity's anger was no longer just a whisper in the dark. It was a shout, a force that echoed through the cosmos, causing even the mightiest empires to take notice. They had pushed too far, and now, the galaxy would feel the consequences. On the battlefield, humanity's ships had begun to shift tactics. Their fleet, once small and outclassed by the alien giants, now moved with a confidence that sent shivers down the spines of their enemies. It wasn't just the power of their ships that was changing things, it was the resolve behind them. Humans were no longer afraid. They were no longer the underdogs. They were the ones with the power now, and they knew it. Admiral Taylor, a seasoned veteran of the human fleet, stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out at the vastness of space. His eyes, hard and focused, reflected the gravity of the situation. He knew that this wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about sending a message. The Nularian fleet had been sent to intercept them, but the humans were ready for them. Taylor could feel the tension in the air, a sense of anticipation building with every passing moment. The enemy was coming, but humanity wasn't running. They were preparing to strike. "What's the status of our weapons?" Taylor asked, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. "Ready," "Sir," came the reply from his tactical officer, who was working furiously at his console. "All systems are green. We've modified our engines for speed, and the new shields are holding strong. We're not going to back down this time." "Good," Taylor muttered. "Because when they show up, we're going to make them wish they never crossed us." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that no one in the room needed to question. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, but now that they were standing at the edge, they were ready to fight. It wasn't just about defending their planet anymore. It was about making a statement to the entire galaxy. Humans were not to be underestimated. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the Nolarian Empire was beginning to feel the pressure. Their fleet, one of the most feared in the galaxy, was about to face something they hadn't anticipated. The Nolarian commanders had always seen the humans as a nuisance, something to be swept aside with little effort. But now, they were starting to understand just how wrong they had been. The reports coming in from their scouts were filled with confusion and fear. The humans weren't backing down. They were preparing for a fight, and worse yet, they were making strides in ways that couldn't be ignored. General Trekar, the leader of the Nolarian fleet, stood in his command center, his slitted eyes narrowing as he reviewed the latest intelligence. He had always prided himself on being able to read the battlefield, to anticipate the enemy's next move. But humanity's anger had thrown everything off balance. They were acting unpredictably, and that terrified him. It wasn't just their ships or weapons that had changed, it was their mentality. The humans were no longer fearful. They were relentless. They were ready for war. "We need to rethink this," Trekar said, his voice low and dangerous. "These humans are not what we thought. They're more dangerous than we ever imagined." The Nolarian officers around him shifted uneasily, their confidence faltering for the first time. It was clear they had underestimated humanity, and now they were about to pay the price. But it wasn't just fear that fueled Trekar's worry. It was the undeniable sense that they had provoked something that could no longer be controlled. The galaxy was changing, and the Nolarian Empire was no longer at the top of the food chain. On Earth, the Human Council met once again, their faces grim as the situation escalated. Marcus, the diplomat who had ignited this movement, stood at the front of the room, his gaze hard. The anger that had started as a spark had now become a wildfire, and it wasn't just a metaphor. Humans were fighting for something much larger than themselves. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy, for their right to stand among the stars without fear. "Every enemy we've ever faced is now watching," Marcus said, his voice steady, but with a quiet intensity. "They think we're weak. They think we're small. But when we fight, we do it with everything we've got. And they'll learn. We won't stop until we take what's ours." His words were simple, but they carried an undeniable truth. The human race had always been underestimated. But now, as they stood on the brink of war, they were showing the galaxy that they would never be pushed aside again. They had the will, the determination, and now they had the strength to back it up. In the depths of space, the first signs of the coming battle were already in motion. The Nolarian fleet, massive and imposing, was preparing to engage the human forces, but they didn't know what awaited them. Humanity had made its stand. The storm that had been brewing for years had finally reached its peak, and it was about to consume everyone who had underestimated the human spirit. The galaxy was about to change. No longer would humanity be the ones to beg for peace. Now they were the ones who would demand it. The Nolarian Empire, and every other empire in the galaxy, was about to learn what it truly meant to challenge humanity. The battle was coming, and it would be a battle that no one would forget. The tension in the galaxy reached its breaking point as humanity's warships, brimming with newfound power, prepared for the first true test of their strength. No one, not even the most advanced empires, had anticipated how swiftly humanity would adapt, how quickly they would turn the tide. It was as if the galaxy itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash between humanity and the mighty empires that had long ruled the stars. The Nularian fleet, still struggling to comprehend the sheer determination of the humans, had advanced towards the edge of human territory. Their ships, sleek and menacing, cut through space with unmatched speed. They had been sent to crush humanity's defiance, to remind them of their place. But as they approached, the Nularian commanders began to sense that something was off. The human fleet, once a scattered force of underfunded ships, had become a unit, moving with coordinated precision. Admiral Taylor stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as the Nularian ships slowly grew larger in the distance. His face was calm, but inside, his heart raced with anticipation. They were about to face the full force of an empire that had never seen a threat like this before. The battle would be brutal, but Taylor knew one thing for certain. Humanity wasn't going to back down. "Ready all systems," Taylor ordered, his voice steady. "I want all hands on deck. This is the moment we've been preparing for." His officers quickly moved to their stations, working in perfect harmony as the countdown began. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for years, adapting their tactics and technology to match the might of the galactic empires. The fleet was ready, but it wasn't just their advanced ships or weapons that would carry them through. It was their resolve, the collective anger and determination of a species that had been pushed to the edge. As the Nularian fleet closed in, General Trekar stood aboard his flagship, watching the human ships approach. He had expected them to cower, to beg for mercy. Instead, they were facing him with a level of confidence that unsettled him. The humans were no longer the weaklings he had once dismissed. They were soldiers now, fighters with something to prove. "Prepare for battle," Trekar growled, his voice laced with frustration. "Do not underestimate them. We end this here." The first shots were fired, and the battle began. Humanity's fleet move as one, engaging the Nularian forces with a precision that took even the seasoned generals by surprise. The humans fought with a fierce determination, their ships maneuvering through the chaos of the battlefield, striking with a force that belied their small size. Each move was calculated, each strike purposeful. This was no longer a skirmish, it was a war. On the front lines, Marcus, the diplomat-turned-soldier, commanded a squadron of human fighters. He had once been a symbol of peace, a voice in the council chambers, but now he was a warrior, leading his people into battle. His heart raced with adrenaline as his fighters zipped through space, dodging enemy fire and returning it with deadly accuracy. The Nularian ships, despite their superior size and firepower, were caught off guard by the humans' unyielding tactics. "Keep it up, squadron. Don't give them an inch," Marcus shouted over the comms, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. His squadron followed his lead, striking the Nularian ships with precision. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for something more. Each blast, each victory, was a message to the galaxy. Humanity was here to stay. They would not be crushed. They would not be silenced. Back on Earth, the Council watched the battle unfold from the safety of their command center. The screens showed images of the human fleet engaging the Nularian ships, the once unstoppable force now facing a resistance it had never seen before. The faces in the room were a mix of fear and awe, but they knew that this was their moment. The battle would determine the fate of humanity and their place in the galaxy. "The Nularian fleet is retreating," one of the officers reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "It looks like the humans are winning." A collective gasp filled the room. It was happening. Humanity had taken the fight to the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and now they were pushing them back. But the battle was far from over. The Nularian Empire wasn't going to surrender easily. General Trekar, furious at the unexpected turn of events, called for reinforcements. But even as he issued his orders, he knew that something fundamental had changed. Humanity had proven something in that moment, something that would forever alter the balance of power in the galaxy. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their right to exist on their own terms. The war had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The aftermath of the battle sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had defeated the Nularian fleet, forcing them to retreat from human space. For the first time in history, a species that had once been dismissed as weak, insignificant, and unworthy of notice had made an undeniable mark on the galactic stage. The victory wasn't just a military one. It was a statement. Humanity had proven that they were no longer the prey of the galaxy. They were its hunters. The Nularian Empire, once the undisputed powerhouse of the stars, was now reeling from the shock of the human counterattack. Admiral Taylor stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as the wreckage of Nularian warships drifted in the vacuum of space. His eyes, though still sharp and calculating, carried the weight of the battle. The victory had been hard-fought, and the cost had been high. Many good men and women had fallen in this fight, but they had achieved the impossible. The Nularian fleet was broken, and humanity had not only survived, they had thrived. "It's not over yet," Taylor said quietly, his voice tinged with a grim understanding. "This was just the first step. The Nularian Empire won't let us get away with this." His tactical officer, Lieutenant Ramirez, nodded solemnly. "We've won this battle, sir, but we've made a powerful enemy. They won't forgive us easily." "Let them come," Taylor muttered, clenching his fists. "Let them send their fleets, their armies. We're ready now. We're not backing down." On Earth, the victory had sparked celebrations, but beneath the surface, there was a growing unease. The Council had been quick to declare the battle a triumph, but the truth was far more complicated. The Nularian Empire was not a force that could be easily beaten. Their retreat was only the beginning of a far larger war that was soon to follow. Marcus, once the diplomat and now a key figure in the war effort, found himself standing in front of the Council once again. The faces around him were a mixture of hope and apprehension. The humans had won the battle, but the war was far from over. "We've made them angry," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But more than that, we've shown them that we can fight. We can win. Now we need to make sure they don't come back. We need to strike before they can regroup." The Council listened intently, knowing that Marcus was right. They had been given a rare opportunity, a moment of weakness in one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. Humanity had to act quickly. But there was a catch. The Nularian Empire wouldn't let this defeat slide without retaliation, and their retaliation would come swiftly and without mercy. In the depths of space, the Nularian Empire was already regrouping. General Trekar stood in his command center, his fury burning brighter than ever. His fleet had been embarrassed. The humans had fought back in ways he had never expected, and now they had to pay. His fingers clenched around the armrests of his chair, the pressure of his anger threatening to crush them. "We've underestimated them," Trekar muttered to his officers. "No more. Prepare the reinforcements. Prepare everything. We will show them the consequences of defying the Nularian Empire." But even as he issued his orders, something deep inside Trekar shifted. He had always seen the humans as beneath him, a nuisance to be crushed with ease. But now, they were a threat, a real, tangible threat that had cost him dearly. The more he thought about it, the more he realized something that unsettled him. Humanity wasn't just a force to be reckoned with. They were the future, and if the Nularian Empire didn't act fast, they could lose everything. The Nularian fleet began to reorganize, and new ships, more powerful and more dangerous, were being built. The Empire was preparing for a retaliation that would leave no room for mercy. The galaxy had been thrown into a state of uncertainty. The once established powers were now on edge. Humanity had awakened something deep within them, a fierce will to survive, to fight, and to win. The storm had only begun, and no one knew where it would end. Back on Earth, Marcus and the human leaders were well aware of what was coming. The Nularian Empire wasn't finished yet. They would be back, stronger than ever, and they would not stop until humanity had been crushed under their heel. But humanity had already proven something crucial. They were no longer afraid. They would face the Nularian retaliation head-on. "Prepare for the next battle," Marcus ordered, his voice cold with determination. "We've shown them we can fight. Now we show them that we can win. Every ship, every soldier, every human on this planet is ready. We will not lose." The message was clear. Humanity was no longer the weak, insignificant species that the galaxy had once dismissed. They had grown stronger, more dangerous, and more united. The Nularian Empire might have regrouped, but humanity had learned a valuable lesson. They were willing to do whatever it took to protect their place in the galaxy. They had started a war, and they would finish it on their terms. As humanity braced for the inevitable return of the Nularian fleet, the galaxy held its breath. This was just the beginning. The true test of humanity's strength was still to come, and no one, least of all the Nularian Empire, knew how it would end. The galaxy had never been more uncertain. The victory against the Nularian fleet had sent ripples across the stars, but it had also set the stage for an even greater conflict. Humanity had stood firm and defeated an empire that had believed itself untouchable. But the Nularian Empire was vast, and its fury was only beginning to stir. As they licked their wounds and prepared to strike back, humanity found itself facing a galaxy that was now aware of its strength. And while that might have been a victory in itself, it also meant that the real battle had only just begun. Admiral Taylor stood on the command deck of his flagship, gazing out into the endless expanse of space. His mind raced with the possibilities of what was to come. The humans had won a great victory, but that had only made their enemies more determined. The Nularian Empire would not forget their humiliation easily. There would be no retreat, no surrender. They were coming, and this time, they would be ready. But so would humanity. "Any updates from the fleet?" Taylor asked, his voice calm but filled with determination. Lieutenant Ramirez was quick to respond. "The Nularian forces are regrouping. They've sent out a distress call to their allies. The rest of the galaxy is taking notice, and the Nularian leadership is pulling every resource they have into preparing for a final assault." Taylor's jaw tightened. "We're not going to sit and wait for them to come to us. We go on the offensive. We take the fight to them. We push forward." The crew was already preparing for the next phase. Humanity wasn't just going to wait for the next battle to come to them. They were going to bring the fight directly to the Nularian Empire and every other empire that dared to challenge them. Humanity was done playing by the rules of the galaxy. Now, they were rewriting those rules. Meanwhile, Marcus, still haunted by the lives lost in the first battle, stood on a balcony overlooking the bustling human capital. The victory had been sweet, but it had come at a cost. His mind wasn't on the celebrations that followed the retreat of the Nularian fleet. Instead, he was focused on the future, the war that was about to intensify. He knew what it meant to fight for survival, but now, humanity would fight for something greater, their place among the stars. They had fought to be free, to be respected, and to secure their future. But in doing so, they had earned the hatred of a powerful enemy, and now they had to be prepared for the storm that would follow. He turned from the view, walking briskly back into the command center. The message was clear. Humanity had to be ready for anything. The Nularian retaliation would be brutal, but humanity was no longer afraid. Their anger had been their strength, and they would use that strength to face the challenges ahead. "Prepare for the next phase of the war," Marcus said as he entered the room. "We don't know when they'll strike, but we need to be ready. Our victory has shown them we are capable of more than they ever expected, and we will show them that they've made a mistake in underestimating us." The council members around him nodded in agreement, their faces hardened by the gravity of what was to come. They had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. The next strike would be decisive, and humanity would have to stand firm in the face of an enemy determined to crush them. Across the galaxy, the Nularian Empire was making its preparations. General Trekar had watched the human victory with fury and disbelief. The humans had caught him off guard once, but he would not allow that to happen again. The Nularian Empire had vast resources at its disposal, and they would not make the same mistake twice. "We will show them what happens when they defy us," Trakhar growled as he stood in his command center, looking out at the fleet being prepared for the counterattack. "This time, there will be no mercy." The Nularian fleet began its march once again, now stronger and better prepared for the inevitable clash with humanity. They would not make the same mistakes again. The humans would be destroyed, and their place in the galaxy would be erased. But even as Trakhar issued his orders, there was a gnawing feeling deep within him. The humans had been a surprise, and that surprise had shaken him to his core. Could they really be as strong as they seemed? Could they truly stand against the might of the Nularian Empire? Back on Earth, the human leadership was finalizing their strategy. Every available ship, every soldier, every resource was being directed towards the coming conflict. The war was no longer about survival. It was about proving that humanity had a place in the galaxy, and the time for hesitation was over. The Nularian Empire, and any other power that dared challenge humanity, would find themselves facing a new kind of enemy. One that would never back down, one that would always fight, and one that had learned the true meaning of strength. "Let them come," Admiral Taylor said quietly as he stood with his crew. "We are ready for them. And this time, we finish what we started." The final battle was approaching, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. The galaxy would never be the same after this war, no matter who won. The humans had proven that they could not be defeated easily. And now, they were about to show the galaxy just how far they would go to protect their future. The war was just beginning. The true fight for humanity's place in the stars was about to unfold.